Welcome to the Operational Technology Cybersecurity Podcast. This podcast focuses on the rapidly growing and often misunderstood intersection of information technology and industrial process. What's going on, everybody? This is Derek Stubbs, your host for the OT Cybersecurity Podcast. So, I don't know where to start this one. Strange times. Kind of feels like we're living in a really boring episode of The Twilight Zone. I guess I can start out by saying today is March 26th, 2020. And I feel like the date is important because it's something of a stake in the ground. Because this whole situation with this virus, whatever we're calling it, I'm not even sure what the proper name is. I'll probably bounce back and forth between calling it the coronavirus or calling it COVID-19. I don't know why. I just do what feels right in the moment. So forgive me if that's kind of confusing. Anyhoodle, this whole situation and its impact on people's lives, small, medium, large businesses, the markets, goods, services, the modern world of finance and trade, the decisions and impacts here are mind-boggling and kind of overwhelming. Not sure I really have words to kind of put it into perspective. It's all just kind of happening and unraveling. I truly don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. So I can only be held to the facts available as of today, because beyond that, I don't know what the hell's going to happen. This episode is not really on any one planned topic. It's going to be more of a ramble, maybe a rant or two. And I feel like I have to apologize for that because when I started the OT Cybersecurity Podcast, I honestly wanted to stay in my lane, industrial cybersecurity. I don't want this pod to be about current affairs, and I definitely don't want it to be about anything remotely political. But I have to talk about what's going on right now. And I think I can do that from the industrial cybersecurity lane. But look, if things get a little sway or a little veer to them, you have my apologies up front, and no, that's not the intention of the show, and that's not what this show is ever going to become. Hopefully, like Lex Ferdman says, this whole event, this trash can fire that's been set by the coronavirus, upon retrospect, will serve as something of a dress rehearsal for how we can better prepare and respond to future catastrophic attacks on our civilization. Because there is so much here to learn from. Just like going to the moon back in the 70s was a good reminder of what science and engineering can do at scale for our civilization, this virus can maybe, hopefully, be the same for our progression in a lot of different dimensions of infrastructure and response to global threats. And look, I approach this topic with full humility. I don't know anything about infectious diseases, economics really, even less about government procedures and powers or pandemics. At best, I know a little something about solving problems with a risk-based approach. And this comes from and is informed by my background working in high-risk industries and in industrial facilities. My job right now is mitigating cyber risk to high-risk industrial operations. Basically helping the companies that own those high-risk facilities understand that all the hazards that are part of their business can be vulnerable to cyber compromise, just like they can be vulnerable to mechanical or human compromise. And for many of these facility owners that I work with, cyber risk can be something that doesn't feel real because it's something they've never seen or had to deal with. And just like what's going on right now across the globe with the coronavirus, things that threaten us can come in ways we would never expect. And maybe that's what we can do with today's episode, is focus on talking about a risk-based approach for looking at the coronavirus, at the attempts to control it, and the cost of those controls. So, risk. Put simply, understanding risk is broadly a combination of answering two questions: how bad and how likely. The foundational assumption to all risk-based methodologies, the backdrop if you will, is that you can't eliminate all risk. You have to define a risk tolerance, because the truth is, regardless of what you're doing, it won't be risk-free. Some risk has to be tolerated, or else you can't operate. You can't do what you need to do. And for every risk that you mitigate, there's a cost to it. And the word cost in this context isn't exclusive to money. It can certainly encompass money, added cost to reduce risk. Cars didn't always come with seatbelts or airbags. Those are risk mitigation features that come at additional cost. Cost can also be things like reduced efficiency, additional resources, additional complexity, impact to the speed by which you're able to produce products. And if a lot of complexity and resources are overhead, you can lose your competitive advantage. These are all different types of costs that come along with mitigating risk. So for this reason, you got to prioritize which risks are most important to mitigate. And ideally, you do this by mitigating your highest consequence risks at your lowest costs. And human beings, despite what it can seem like sometimes, instinctually have a really good ability to manage risk. And part of getting so far as a species has been our high tolerance for risk. Even with the coronavirus mayhem, being a human being in the year 2020 is probably the least risky time to be a human in human history. We've done a great job with modern society of mitigating the risks of being humans. But we still, even in the modern construct, tolerate a lot of risk. That's why we have a whole industry, insurance, built to help us tolerate risk. And we do it for the low cost of getting XYZ done. I mean, just look at driving. The activity of driving is, on paper, probably the riskiest thing you do in the day. The consequences of getting in a car accident can be really high. And the statistics show us it's pretty likely. But cars are really, really convenient. Just ask anyone who has to take the bus. And with driving, more and more, we come up with risk mitigation features that attack high consequence items that can be mitigated at low cost. I haven't seen a car manufacturer out there that makes a car that can't go over 50 miles per hour. Even though that would significantly reduce a lot of risk, the cost is too high. So I look at something like the coronavirus. And like I said, I don't know anything about infectious diseases. But I know the coronavirus isn't the only infectious disease we deal with. So my question is, what's our risk tolerance to COVID-19? And does that align with our risk tolerance towards other infectious diseases? I honestly don't know. It's difficult because we've never experienced this before, and we're dealing with a mix of objective and subjective risks. How are we prioritizing the COVID-19 risks? Based on everything I've seen, we definitely know there is a segment of the population that is more vulnerable to the coronavirus than others. Are we prioritizing risk mitigation, which I guess the only mitigation right now is isolation, and washing your hands, to that population? Are we prioritizing based on consequence? Again, I don't know, but in my mind, that's part of a risk-based approach. I would love to know if somebody somewhere with any clout in the decision-making chain is modeling this risk. Get some Navy engineers with submarine experience on the job, because those people understand high risk, high consequence decision making. Just to pontificate a bit, why aren't we using the data that we have about the American population, IDing everyone that is in the high consequence population, and ensuring that population is isolated and resourced to isolate for the required time? I know there's a bunch of factors that I'm likely missing, but it's an example to illustrate a risk-based approach. We, as a civilization, have done amazing things using risk-based methods. We fly in the sky, we sail the seas, we harness the elements, heat, cold, high pressure. So is this approach applicable to infectious diseases? And are we using it with the COVID-19 crisis? To me, treating everyone as if they have the virus isn't prioritizing risks. And if you aren't prioritizing risk, your risk mitigation cost is going to be too high. Because again, as we said, you can't eliminate all risk. And I can hear the collective listeners saying, Okay, Dungeon D, you've been in isolation a little too long. You're stating some obvious shit here, but I'm just trying to think through a risk-based approach to the problem of COVID-19. And I can't help but feel like the risk tolerance is too low and the risk prioritization is too broad. I'm not saying I have any answers here. I'm just saying, for me personally, I don't see the strategy. And that's scary because you can't win without a strategy. No good system, no good sports team, no successful business, no healthy lifestyle. Hell, you can't really even conduct a productive day without a strategy and a target. And here's maybe a good point to talk about the data crisis within this COVID-19 crisis. Wow, I mean, I'm having a really hard time trusting the data I've seen thrown around regarding this crisis. I don't know how we're doing what we're doing based on the data that I've seen available. In my mind, there should be teams. I'm talking teams from the federal, state, city, county levels of engineers, statisticians, and data scientists on the front freaking lines of this thing, doing nothing but collecting data, building data sets from qualitative, so that subjective opinion, feedback, personal story-based data, and quantitative data, so the objective facts, the test results, counts, charts, to drive whatever strategy is in play here. The COVID-19 winning strategy. What I don't want to see happen is that post 9/11 TSA approach to solving this problem. Reactive. Oh, we found bombs and shoes. Now everyone has to take their shoes off. This isn't a strategy, and it's definitely not a winning strategy. We can absolutely do better, and we need to do better given the financial, social, and personal impact fighting this thing with the wrong tactics might have. Because as we've all seen, the mitigation steps we are taking, these mass shutdowns, wow, these have consequences. And again, I'm not an economist, B&C econ student at best. Don't know what I'm talking about here, but I do know enough economics to know that we have a highly interlaced system. For me, when schools shut down, this whole coronavirus situation kind of cranked up a notch and became all too real. And from there, it just seems like we've seen these economic dominoes starting to fall over on each other. And that is frankly very scary to watch. Because, and again, it harkens back to the premise of this episode, from a risk management perspective, if we are taking such high consequence steps for mitigation here, the risk impact must be huge. And maybe it is. I don't know. I just don't have the data to say one way or another. And that's been frustrating for someone like me and that has a brain that works like mine does. And again, maybe it's just me, but this combination of lack of data and lack of clear strategy to beat this thing has been a little bit of a breeding ground for some of the irrational behavior seen both in social media and in person. The easy example is the empty shelves at grocery stores. It's nothing that's ever been on my bucket list, but I can say that's the first time I've ever been to my local grocery store and seen so many empty shelves, having spent most of my life living near the Texas Gulf Coast. It's definitely an exponent larger than what I've seen in response to floods or hurricanes, but it's not surprising. Supply chains are built to be as cost-effective as possible, and part of that is an on-demand supply chain model. This crisis has touched a lot of things, but at no time has the food supply or grocery supply been at risk. The only thing that is actually happening here is people are just buying more than they normally would in a very condensed amount of time. So it creates the perception of a shortage. And that perception precipitates more abnormal buying behavior. And the cycle kind of continues. And then self-isolation has done nothing but compound the problem because now people really do feel like they need to buy more than normal to limit their exposure to crowds and grocery store trips. And I just can't help but think about, okay, now what if this pandemic was an actual coordinated attack on our civilization? So we have the virus, but let's say we also had a coordinated disruption in GPS or telecoms. How much worse of an impact would that make to the current situation? I think it would be exponential. And again, going back to the intro of the show, the hope here is that this virus can honestly be a catalyst to truly strengthening our infrastructure and better preparing us for more sophisticated and coordinated attacks on our civilization. To me, that's a bright spot. That's a positive. That's an opportunity. Outside of coronavirus, there are honestly lots of reasons to increase automation and digitization. Data truly is powerful. This makes business sense. We should be doing this because it's the right thing to do. With the side bonus, it helps during times of pandemic. I mean, even with the current situation, it's come to mainstream attention that 70% of all goods are 100% dependent on truck movement. I mean, that's a critical single point of failure. Brick and mortar grocery stores, look, this is just a good example. I'm not picking on grocery stores, but it's a good example of what I'm talking about here. You have grocery stores that, from a business model perspective and a profit model perspective, or let me put it this way, for a long, long time, they've been able to do essentially the same thing and make money off of it. So naturally, we haven't seen a lot of innovation in the grocery store industry. They got a profit model to resist changing, and thus they're not going to change until some grocery store equivalent of Tesla comes along and disrupts the whole thing. And for good or bad, we as consumers have largely been comfortable with this. But I think all industries, especially critical industries, have to look at their business models. And it would be great if we could do that with the fresh eyes of this virus and its impact on civilization. In my opinion, it would be great if we could use it for a national push towards increased automation and innovation. And you might think, okay, why? Why do grocery stores need to innovate? And to me, the answer is simple. It's out of respect for consumers, people who shop at grocery stores. Retailers should be on a constant quest to increase convenience and decrease time. Time and energy is our most valuable commodity. No different than Google, Facebook, Amazon, Uber, etc., etc. Grocery stores should be optimizing their business around data models. So if I, as a consumer, want to shop in person, there's no reason I shouldn't be able to go into a grocery store and have a grocery store AI tell me exactly what I bought last time, what I'm buying this time, identify any price deltas, and yes, give me suggestions for how I might lower my cost or how I might shop a little healthier. It should know my habits better than I do. And at the end of the shopping experience, I should be able to plug my cart into the cash register, where the cash register automatically ingests everything from the cart and within seconds has it nicely sorted and shrink wrapped out the other end. And again, this is my fantasy of what would ideally happen. I like shrink wrap materials, but who knows, the ideal scenario might not even involve a cart and a cash register. But the point is more that it should be hands-free, human-free, fast, and efficient. And I know there's sensitivity around human work reduction. But this model is in the best interest of the consumer, in the best interest of the grocery store profit model, and I believe in the best interest of the worker as well. Human beings are a huge source of variation and anomalies. Automating out the repetitive portions of the grocery store, that frees up people to provide more creative services to the grocery store experience. Whether that be more individualized health and wellness assistance, special needs assistance, artisan cooking assistance, doing things to make the shopping experience better. Those are the things humans are good at. Everything else should be as automated as possible. It's healthier, it's safer, and it's more cost controlled. So this isn't just about grocery stores. This is about improving people's lives by leveraging technology in a meaningful way. That's what technology is here for. Truly, 99% of the things we are asked to do in response to stopping the spread of COVID-19 are things we should frankly be doing anyway. We can automate things so they're faster, safer, more reliable, cheaper. We can digitize things so they're wireless and we don't have as many high-touch surfaces like gas pumps, credit card machines, handles, knobs. We can double and triple down on remote learning, remote working, remote medicine, and the million other types of interactions we have to do today in person that we should have the option of doing remotely as well. The difference between doing something in person and remote should be trivial. All these things matter. And they matter not because of that one time we all had to stay in our homes. They matter because they are the right things to do in this and all other situations. And together, the culmination of these things ultimately frees us up to do what we want to do with our time, energy, and location. And that should be something we aim for. As a consumer, as a student, as an employee, as a patient, and as a taxpayer. These things aren't technology problems. These are largely people, process, culture, and ultimately vision problems. And if this virus can help us break down those walls, then that's a huge silver lining that I, for one, am thankful for. Automating jobs that are routine and non-creative should be the next boom. This COVID-19 crisis and the economic fallout can be just the catalyst we need for the Industrial Revolution 2.0, shifting human work to automation in a way that isn't a supplement or a bolt-on. I'm talking about a ground-up redesign of business models in a way that shows positive ROI. So raise a glass to realizing that future opportunity. So in kind of conclusion of this episode, one thing I will say, it may sound odd, but it's in the same vein as this automation and digitization topic. I do like the technology forward push that has resulted from the stay-at-home mandates. I talk to a lot of people who come from companies and cultures where leadership was highly and adamantly opposed to work from home. And they've been forced to do it, and now they see it's not so scary. And I honestly think I'm going to do a whole episode on this topic because there's a new and unique cybersecurity responsibility from a remote workforce, and especially for industrial companies. So stay tuned. We're going to talk a lot more about that and what some of the best practices are for remote access and secure authentication. Okay, so I'll cut it off here. In closing, I sincerely hope everyone is staying safe. And despite the fact that I'm questioning the data and the risk mitigation strategy at play here, I understand that our current attempts to stem the effects of this coronavirus are a best effort and should absolutely be followed. I just know as a nation, we have accomplished so many great things using existing practices of science and engineering, and I would just love nothing more to see our nation flex that muscle like never before. The upcoming weeks and maybe months are going to be quite interesting. No shortage of things to talk about, that's for sure. So this is Derek signing off. My neighbor's dogs are barking. Bye for now.